I started making the most amount of money I've ever made in my entire life when I started actually treating my brain like the most valuable asset that it is. Like, it still baffles me till this day that the mind is responsible for literally every single process in our life. You want to go to the gym, you want to train your body, that requires the brain. You want to focus and think, that requires the brain. You want to go to sleep, that requires the integrity of your brain. Every single thing you do depends on how well you train your brain. So if you're not training your brain, what are you doing? This is literally the most valuable asset that we have in this world. Everything that you think of that has been created in this most technologically advanced time in life has been created through the brain. So train that shit. So now that I hope we understand that the mind is the most important thing to train, let's actually talk about it. So as an example, when it comes to training the mind, we already start off with some large flaw where, let's say, on the y-axis we have skill and the x-axis we have time, right? A lot of times people are like, oh, I don't know how to meditate, I can't meditate, meditating's not for me, blah, 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 because I can't sit and quiet my thoughts. What you're actually doing is you're trying to compare yourself to a monk when you're over here. Or in better terms, you're pretty much saying, I can't play basketball, I shouldn't play basketball, I suck at basketball because I don't have the same amount of three-point accuracy as Stephen Curry. No shit, because you're not putting in the same amount of time, you don't have the same amount of skill to be over here. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it, you can't do it, or you're not good at it. But you will suck, and you need to understand that. So now that we have that out of the way, training the mind is a skill, and with every skill, you're probably gonna be bad at it. But with most skills, it's going to be something that will improve your life in some way, shape, or form. So now that we have that out of the way, and we're taking care of mind 101, the way I like looking at training the mind is literally like training the body, or looking at the mind like a muscle, because in essence, it is, not biologically, but you get what I'm trying to say. So when it comes to training blocks, the same way you don't go to the gym 7 days a week to train the exact same muscle, it's the same thing with the mind. Think about how many times you've had a rest day for your mind. You have a rest day for the body, but not the mind. Already, that's crazy to me. That's crazy to me. But here's the importance. Let's say you're looking at it like that, and you're looking at it like a training split, right? Your rest day for the mind, that should be a day when you're focusing on recovery. And what that recovery looks like is journaling, reflecting, thinking back on things, extrapolating thoughts and ideas and converging them together. Because the same way you need a rest day for the body to grow, you need a rest day for the mind to grow. Because imagine, like, in the world we live in, there's so much information, and we're always consuming, we're always whatever. Or look at the stomach, indigestion, digestion. We're always ingesting stuff, but we're not properly digesting it, whether that's information or whether that's stress. We're not accurately metabolizing all these things in the mind, so we're bloated, we're over encumbered, and we're still feeding ourselves. It's like gluttony. If you don't have a rest day, you're treating your mind with high levels of gluttony. And that's crazy to me as well, okay? Actually write that down. How you want to structure your life and times, and I'm going to have a separate video on the training blocks of the mind. But the more important thing to note is if you don't train your mind like you train the body, then your body and mind will be at mercy of your thoughts and your decisions. So we have goal accuracy. So again, similar to the analogy of the body. Imagine I'm trying to grow my glutes, but I'm doing bicep curls every single day. That sounds stupid, and it is. And that's also what we're doing with the mind. So what you need to do is you need to have some sort of level of accuracy to what you're exactly trying to do. So we have two key ways of how we perceive reality. So let's say, I don't know, this is the brain, I'm clearly an artist, right? Let's say this is the external world, this is the internal world. If you're someone who's externally biased, meaning you're always looking into the external world, this is what you call exteroception. Okay, your perception is in the external world. And then the inverse, if you're someone who's always in the mind, then that's interoception. Okay, your perception is internal. So the interesting thing about meditations is, the reason why I bring up the analogy of like doing bicep curls for the glutes is because it actually works with meditation. So if you're someone who's exteroceptively biased or interoceptively biased, you should be doing a meditation that focuses on the opposite. So as an example, you're someone who's exteroceptively biased. What does that look like in real life? You're constantly stimulated by the external world. You're looking at things, you're watching TV, you're scrolling, whatever. And mind you, scrolling is an exteroceptively biased work because your phone is not in the mind. You're looking at the external world, okay? So if you're exteroceptively biased, you do what's called an interoceptive meditation. And I'm going to go into detail on that in a second, mind my spelling, and then vice versa. If you're someone who's very in the mind, then you do an exteroceptive meditation. So what are both of those? An interoceptive meditation is you focusing on something internally in the body. So perfect example of this is a body scan. Perfect example is breath work and feeling the actual sensations of breathing inside of the body. Whereas the inverse, if you're doing an exteroceptive meditation, it's something that involves the external world. So one simple traditional one is literally staring at the flame of a candle. A sound bath is another good example. Or another one is what you just call gazing, which is literally just staring at a point in the far distance of life, like the physical world, I should say, and just stare at it for at least 2 minutes. Keep your focus as deep as you can onto that. Because even the word meditation sounds daunting, but a lot of times we're meditating and we don't realize. Meditating is simply bringing conscious awareness to something in this present moment. Write that down. Because cooking can be meditative. If I'm very present and I'm aware and I'm conscious and I'm intentful with the work that I'm doing. But most people don't meditate because most people are on autopilot. So if you focus on the conscious awareness of the thing you're doing in this moment, that is a meditation. But you have to be consciously aware of it and the intent has to be there. So then you now take that and put it into here. Which part of my perception do I need to train? If I need to focus more on, if I'm stuck in my mind, exteroceptive. If I'm stuck in the external world, interoceptive. This is why, again, it's focusing on your goal accuracy. So again, don't train bicep curls if you're trying to grow your thighs. Same thing with if you're trying to get internal into the world, don't only do internal meditations. Okay? Now we're starting to understand this whole skill over time thing. Now you're already improving your skill because you're learning. Now you just need to put the time in. Cool. Goal accuracy out of the way. So another cool thing that I like to draw a comparison or relatability to is mobility. So in the time of recording, a couple weeks ago, I just finished my second Toronto Waterfront half marathon. And I'm someone who grew up with bad asthma, got hospitalized twice for asthma. I could no longer run, I could never run longer than 2 kilometers. Fortunately, with a lot of breath work and a lot of intention, I was able to actually start running longer distances. And within a year, I was able to run my first half marathon. I bring this all up to say because in my first half marathon, I completed it without stopping, which was my goal. But the biggest hindrance for me was my legs were really tight because I didn't focus on mobility. So in the second year, which was now a couple weeks ago, I focused a good portion of time, not only on the breath work, which created the foundational base, but I focused a lot more on mobility, getting my legs nice and loose. So once I did that, I was able to apply more pressure over time on my legs without cramping them up or impacting them in any deep way. This is the same thing that happens with the brain. Now let me draw something here. And I like to call this mental mobility. Imagine this is a head. If this is what your head looks like, I'm sorry. But anyway, I digress. So let's say this is your head and this is the brain, okay? So if we're looking at life in terms of modes of perception, right, or how you perceive the reality or how much of reality do you perceive, let's say you have this wide lens here, and then in another reality you have this narrow lens here, okay? So for the sake of this explanation, let's call this mental tension. Mental tension. And then for the sake of this, let's call this mental mobility. So if we're looking at these two things, now there's another key thing that I need to add in here as well. These little dots, and I promise you they're very important, and I'm gonna add some context to them in a second, okay? So what is the relationship between mental tension and mental mobility? So mobility, what's happening in the body, let's say we're talking physically, is it increases your range of motion to decrease injury, to increase your ability to expand and apply pressure or tension over time, right? So it's like longevity. Whereas mental tension isn't inherently bad. If you look at it, tension is like a storage of energy, right? And then when you release that tension, that's energy being produced. So tension can be bad or good depending on how it's stored. So as an example, if I'm doing a bicep curl, this is mental tension. And mental tension is valuable because that's what's allowing me to apply that motion. But if I have no tension, then I can't do that motion. But if I hold that tension too long, then I can risk the injury of the body. Now, if I focus on mental mobility, I get a deeper range of motion. I'm actually increasing the health of this muscle belly and allowing me to improve the amount of tension and the time under tension that I can engage with. So if we now translate that to the mind, it's the same fucking thing. Now, mental tension, let's look at this in the example of tunnel vision, okay? So I'm going into a deep work block, I'm focused. Is it good or is it bad? Well, if you're going through a deep level of output, this is good. But the risk that you get without focusing on mental mobility are these dots. So these dots, think of them as ideas or insights or esoterically of downloads, right? So a lot of times people are like, oh, I don't have any creativity. I can't think, blah, 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 because you're mentally tense. So there are times where you can still get those insights and ideas, but not as frequently as if you're more mobile inside of the mind, right? So now the importance of this is both of them should be influenced. So how would you do these things? So this is a good way to look at it, right? A lot of the times when we're doing work, we're doing life, we go to the bathroom, we eat food, whatever, we're always fucking stimulated, always, right? So what happens with stimuli is what increases tension, and silence is what increases flexibility. So as an example, if I want to do a training block of building some mental mobility or mental flexibility, I will go into the absence of stimuli. So I will literally sit down and stare at a wall and just observe my thoughts. And what that's doing is it's widening this here. So that's why for your mind, it feels useless because you're so used to mental tension being the actual benefit or goal or objective that now when you're expanding your horizon, you don't go as deep, you go wider. And then you're like, oh, fuck, I'm wasting my time. But what you're doing is you're focusing on mental mobility. So now when you get more mobility or flexibility, that's what increases expansion. Right? So if you're focusing on new ideas, trying to converge thoughts together or truncate deep insights, this is the place where you focus on expansion. Whereas on the inverse, if you want to focus on output, you want to increase your mental tension. But another key piece of this all, again, if we're drawing a relationship to muscles, is you have these other things inside of the mind. And this is what I like to call mental entropy or mental lactate. Right? Let's put a line here. Lactate. Mental lactate. Right? So the same way the body, when you're applying tension, it will build up lactate, or you know that thing when you're doing curls and now it starts to feel a little loose, or sorry, it starts to feel a little burning and then you have to stop? Lactate. Same thing happens in the mind. But instead of you stopping because the muscle hurts, mental lactate is what increases brain fog, writer's block, lack of creativity, lack of motivation, lack of inspiration, because you're not clearing the lactate out of the brain. There's not actually biological lactate in the way that the body is, but again, I'm drawing these comparisons. So now the goal of how do you reduce mental lactate? Again, mental mobility. So now the less lactate you have in the mind, the clearer the brain can operate. So now you can apply tension if you feel, you can apply flexibility if you feel, or you have the ability to fully connect all of these ideas that are inside of that wider range of perception, right? This is the process that I call mental mobility. So if you are not mentally mobile, then you have a very low % chance of improving your creativity, your long-term focus blocks, your productivity. All of these things are at mercy because you're just constantly bicep curling all the time like a gym bro. Anyway, so now that we have mental mobility out of the way, let's talk about what I like to call the mental empire, right? Everyone in this world, oh, we want to build an empire, we want to build this whole thing, generational wealth, enter your keyword. But what we're not realizing is, let's actually look at empires from the standpoint of history. I am not a history buff, but I like history, and I feel like everyone who's watching this has studied history, whether forcefully or intentionally. Anyway, now, let's imagine this is a castle. And I say imagine this is a castle because my drawings are not the best. Actually, I have the sickest drawings ever. Why did I downplay myself? Imagine this is an empire. This is your empire. This is your mind, okay? What happens to an empire? You want to protect it. That's an important piece. So let's say you put a moat around this empire. And for those non-history buffs out there, a moat is usually some sort of body of water that protects the empire so people don't just walk up in there, okay? And now you're like, oh, well, I have the sickest empire in the world. I want to make sure no one takes my shit. So now you're like, all right, let's add a deeper layer of defense. So now you have, I don't know, like poisonous grass. I don't know if that's even a thing, but for the sake of this imagination, just imagine that's another form of defense, okay? Okay, your place is set. This is good. You're like, yo, no one's touching my shit. Life is good. Why did I bring up the idea of the mental empire? Because most empires were destroyed from within, and your mind is no exception. Write that down, and I'm going to explain to you why. So now, there needs to be something called mental permeability. So I don't know if you remember in biology class, let's say this is a cell, and these are the organelles within the cell, whatever, and then this is the interstitial fluid, whatever, right? The cell needs to be permeable, meaning that it needs to have things being able to enter and leave, because toxic waste will grow in here, and there's also nutrients that needs to come in. So nutrients needs to come in, waste needs to leave, permeability. So now let's look at this here. Why do we need mental permeability in this empire? Because let's say, and now this is where the explanation gets sick. Okay, all right, you're in this mental empire and you're like, oh, let's say you're royalty. Oh, royalty, I need some food. We need to go get some more resources, whatever. So you're like, all right, say no more. Let me go get some resources. So you now leave your castle. I just realized there's no door in the castle. So now this is you. And now you're like, fuck, I need to go past this moat. I don't know, maybe there's like alligators in here or something, right? And then now that you have to focus on all this energy passing that moat, then you're gonna get past the poisonous grass. Now you can focus on finding food. So all this energy expended to leave, to then focus on the task at hand. And then now let's say you got some food, you have to expend all that energy to come back in, to come into there. What's happening in the relationship of the mind? Two things. First things first. When it comes to mental permeability, the reason why it's important to have these defenses, but if you have too many or your guard is up or you're too closed-minded, it takes so much time and effort for you to go out and bring new insights inside of your mind. You're closed-minded, so your beliefs, your stories, your behaviors, your habits are so much harder to change. Why? Well, number one, because you've created all these defenses. But another thing of how the world works or how the mind works is the mind likes to follow the path of least resistance. So if it realizes every single time I need to go out and acquire resources, acquire knowledge, change my mode of thinking, build new habits, I have to do all of this shit, acquire it, and then go back in and do all this, it's going to make it so much harder for you to build your empire because of all that extra work associated. So now that's on the output side, if you need to go out and seek and acquire knowledge. Now, why is it important that we focus on permeability, meaning we focus on not only the inside and outside? Well, there's two reasons. If I were to look at the brain in another regard, so let's say, again, this is the mind. I don't know why I keep drawing it like this, but it doesn't matter. Okay, so your mind interprets reality through two key antennas in your brain, right? So one key antenna here is called the thalamus. And then the other antenna is called the anterior insula. Okay, so what's happening here is the thalamus is receiving information or inputs from the external world. So the five senses, what you see, what you touch, what you taste, etc., to then give information to the mind so the mind can create some sort of action to the body. And then for the insula, it's taking information from the body and reading things like, I don't know, maybe I'm hungry. Now I need to recruit more resources to go acquire food. So these are two things. This is for the external world. This is for the internal world. But the reason why I bring this all up is because most of the time, we have a hard time discerning between signal and noise, right? Because antennas are receiving input, but input can either be signal or it can be noise. What is the difference? So noise is noise. It's something that is just, it's static. It's just radio sound. Whereas signal is the actual thing you're trying to listen to. So when your mind isn't as mobile or isn't as flexible as it should be, there's more noise that interferes, and it's harder for you to discern between that signal and the noise. So you might read the wrong thing. So as an example, you might feel like, oh, I'm hungry, but in reality, it's not that you're hungry, it's because you're bored, and now you start eating and you're feeding into the noise. The interesting thing about this is the more that you feed into signal and noise is the more that you'll feed into signal or noise. So if you keep leaning into noise and discerning that noise is the signal, you will keep allowing noise to be the signal, and the inverse is true. So it's important to know the difference. And another reason why I bring this up is because we like to believe, oh, as an example, I'm always scrolling on my phone, I'm always distracted because I have so many notifications. Fun fact, there was a study that has determined that only about 10% of our distractions are from the external world. 90% of it is based on the internal, okay? And that's why I say great empires are destroyed from within and not from without. And your mind is no exception. So let's go into the deep nuance of this example here, okay? So let's say you're like, okay, sick, I have a bunch of food, whatever. And now let's say this is the food hall, okay? You got a bunch of food over here. And you have, 100 people. And out of all these 100 people, everyone has the same amount of food. But then you keep checking the food logs, but there's more food being taken every time. So your first intention, you don't know whether it's signal or noise. You're like, oh, someone's eating more food than they should be. And now you start banishing people. Now people are leaving, and now there's outrage because it's like you just harmed someone's family member and they were being good, and now there's all this turmoil in here. But every night you kept hearing this like thing, but you were so mentally overwhelmed with running this thing that noise, you were just like, oh, it's probably just a squeak on the bed. But that squeak on the bed was actually an army of rats that kept coming in here, eating all this food. And now because you weren't able to discern between the signal and the noise, you now made a bad decision that created poor morale inside of the house. A second piece of this is just like a fire. If you enclose a fire and there's no oxygen, the fire will die. If you enclose the mind and not allow permeability to come in, your ideas will die. So it's the same thing. The same way you want to be able to go out and get ideas, you want to also be able to bring things back in as well. So in the mind, when you focus on signal and noise, how do you build that? A good example is body scans, or a great way to train the insula over time, so it's easier to discern what signal is and what noise is. So you can be like, oh, I'm bloated because I ate this thing, therefore that's the signal, I should no longer do that anymore. And then the same thing with the thalamus. You might realize that you're looking at something in the external world, just like, oh, that is a threat, but it actually isn't. You just, for some reason in your past history of things, you would mistake the signal for noise, and now you're making bad decisions, okay? So if you want to create a strong mental empire, you need to improve your mental permeability. Mental permeability is influenced by mental flexibility, and mental sensitivity is influenced by presence, awareness, and meditations. So again, imagine trying to build an empire and you're not focusing on any of this. You are literally going to internally collapse everything, and then you're going to blame everyone else except yourself because you're stuck here killing your brain because you didn't train your brain when you realize that your brain is the most important asset that you have. The rhetorical question for you is, if you knew that your mind was the most valuable asset that you have on this earth, why in the world would you not train it with as much intention as you possibly can? Thank you for listening to my TED Talk. If you ever want to have any deeper conversations on any of these things, I want to create a deeper cadence of building more information around these things. So it's more valuable for me, for you to like, subscribe, share this, but comment below deeper insights so I can know what to focus a lot of my time, effort, and energy onto, because I want everyone to build a mental empire, because I genuinely believe most of the issues that happen in the world are because people don't train their mind to understand how to use their mind in the healthiest way possible. And we blame the 10% when 90% is it's actually our fault, but we don't know any better because we're humans and we're primitive, but that doesn't mean we have to be like that forever.